Haley, and I'm the Hope for HIE social worker. Thank you for tuning in for this session of our Peer Perspective series. Today, we're going to be talking to these amazing panelists. We have Megan, Nicole, and Jamie here, and they are part of our more less medically complex, kind of more mild HIE diagnosis. So they're going to share about their journey with their child and just give some great insight. As we always want to remind everyone, this is not medical advice. So if you need any medical advice or you're curious about anything, specifically medically, please follow up with your child's medical team. But I'm going to let the panelists go ahead and introduce themselves, and then we'll get started. So whoever wants to go first, go ahead.
I can start since I'm off mute. So I'm Jamie, and my daughter is 4 years old and has more mild outcomes now, although was severe at birth, and we were in the NICU for a couple months. Now she's more mildly affected, but still navigating a lot of the challenges that come with HIE. We live in Texas area, and just excited to talk with you other moms and connect with y'all.
Hi, I'm Nicole. My son, Elliot, is 9 years old. His HIE has always kind of been more on the mild end, and we're now just seeing more long-term effects at this age, starting at about 6. So I look forward to connecting with everybody and answering any questions in that realm.
Hi, my name's Megan Carter. I live in Canada, and I've been a peer mentor since the program started. And my daughter is 7 years old and has a few diagnoses, has cerebral palsy, and was born with HIE. So excited to be here to talk about the subject today, and looking forward to hearing from all the panelists.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. So first, if you each wouldn't mind just giving a short little information about kind of your NICU experience. So a little bit about your birth and then kind of what that was like. I know some of you have mentioned like kind of how long your NICU stay was, just to give everyone an idea of kind of the very beginning of your journey.
Okay, so for us, we were my daughter was born in 2020, so it was like the height of the pandemic. So that was definitely an added layer of complications to our NICU journey. And it was a healthy pregnancy, as you often hear in our community, and unexpected HIE event. But 4 weeks prior to my due date, I went into early labor with decreased movement. And upon arriving to the hospital, she had, low her heartbeat was low, and we did an emergency C-section shortly after. I had fetal maternal hemorrhage, so her blood had lost her body. That was something that was originally told to me, and then my doctors said, no, that's not what you had. There was quite a bit of back and forth on that. Which was very difficult for me to not have a name for what happened to her. But I don't know if anyone here has consulted with Dr. Harvey Kilman from Yale School of Medicine. He does placental pathology and reviewed my placenta and did reconfirm my diagnosis of fetal maternal hemorrhage. So she was really deprived of blood and had multiple blood transfusions at birth, and she was a full code and had CPR, and was transferred to another NICU where we were for 2 months recovering. Her time there was complicated. We dealt with all of the organ failure, kidney damage, liver damage, severe heart failure, and the seizures. While she was there, she ended up having a surgery for pyloric stenosis, which was at least attributed to her being treated with antibiotics and having a C-section. And then she was discharged on a feeding tube at 2 months with nothing by mouth due to her aspiration risks. That time in the NICU was just absolutely brutal. We weren't allowed visitors because of COVID. So she never met her siblings. My other children forgot that they had a sister, which was actually less painful than them constantly asking when she was going to come home like they did in the beginning. But by the time school had started and she still hadn't been home, they, had told their friends at school and their teachers that they just had one sibling. They, not in a harsh way, but in a way that it wasn't in their reality. They never saw her. Their sister was at, the NICU and they weren't allowed to see her. She was only allowed to have one visitor at a time. And me and my husband were the only people who were allowed to see her. But she was there for 2 months and was given a very severe prognosis as far as what her outcome would be. So we were told that she would never walk or talk or interact with us or eat by mouth, which was it's a very heavy thing to process when your expectations for your child's future shifts. Afterwards, we had a lot of perplexity because she did hit milestones. I don't want to go too far into everything, but I think that is a short summary of our NICU experience and our diagnosis and what caused her HIE event.
So I'll go next. I had a pretty typical pregnancy. My son was my third child. I thought I'd do the whole hospital water birth thing. The midwives cleared me for it, said, fine, great, everything looks great. I went into labor I should say, my water broke at around probably 3 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. And I was like, oh, neat, I've never had this happen before. No labor. Waited a few hours, but they finally said, why don't you come in? Because we'll see if you're having contractions you can't feel. Okay, fine. I go in, the contractions are close, we get in the water tub, everything seems to be going fine. And we are about 10 minutes to the 7 o'clock hour, and that night, and suddenly they have me push, they're holding on to me, and they're like, just push, we'll get him out. I push, and then his head comes out, and then he is stuck. And that is when they realized that he had flailed his shoulders and he was a face-up presentation. So they pulled the plug on the water tub, flooded the room, picked me up, moved me to a bed, um, performed what's called a McRoberts technique. At this point, it's shift change, so now we have two sets of nurses, two sets of everybody, and it took them about 8 minutes to get him out once they realized he was stuck. Um, from that point, they moved him away from us. They're yelling. There's lots of yelling. There's lots of chaos happening. And this is my husband's first child, my third child. And he's like, this isn't how it's supposed to go, is it? And I said, no, it's not. It took 13 minutes to resuscitate him, took 10 minutes to even get the start of an APGAR score of more than 0. And he was about 3 hours later transported to a NICU 2 hours away from us. So he was supposed to be transported by helicopter. It was raining, so they sent an ambulance, which kept adding all this time. From there, he spent 8 days in the NICU. We feel very fortunate that it was only 8 days, but it was 8 very intense days because it went from he has a one-on-one nurse 24 hours a day to, well, you're going home tomorrow. He did experience a couple seizures. They attributed it to the hypothermic cooling. They also gave us the talk of your MRI could come back completely clear with a very devastating outcome. It could come back very devastating with a very clear outcome. It really is not an indicator of anything other than a starting point. And when they came back after his MRI and told us that his MRI was clear, they seemed a little more hopeful, but we're also like, but that doesn't mean we know what he's going to do. A couple days later, they send us home.
Uh, for me, we had a long NICU stay. My story is kind of fun, interesting, sad, funny maybe. But I went to the hospital because I didn't feel her moving. So I'm a strong advocate now for counting those kicks. I wish that I'm sure some of you feel the same, that we talked more about counting those kicks because I didn't take it seriously. But Didn't feel those kicks into the night and into the morning. So went to the hospital with like my grocery bags, thinking I'll just go step in and go grocery shopping after. Went alone, didn't even tell anybody I was going. And then was told that the baby wasn't moving, and I needed to have an emergency section. So whisked off like by myself to have an emergency C-section, called my husband, and he was at work, so he had to come down. But um, then I had emergency section. She was pulled. She didn't cry, so that was traumatic. I'm sure if anyone's experienced that, you always think you're gonna have a baby. They pull them out, they're gonna cry. There was no cry. Apgar stores were low. They whisked her away. And I just got lucky that the hospital already, because she met the threshold for the cooling method, they started the cooling method immediately. So I didn't actually see her until she was already being cooled. And so that was pretty sad as well, but happy that they did start the cooling method immediately. Then they whisked her, they literally showed me her like in being cooled in an incubator for 5 minutes. I had 5 minutes with her, and then they whisked her away to Sick Kids Hospital, which is a very well-known hospital in Canada. And I was at a different hospital, so my husband had to go to Sick Kids with her, and then I was at a different hospital because I had a C-section. So I was there with my family and friends. Then I left my hospital after they cleared me, and I went to the Sick Kids Hospital where she was there for quite some time. The hospital actually released her after 2 weeks because she had seizures. So they have to wait to make sure they don't have seizures anymore. And her breathing, was going up and down. So it took a while to get her off a breathing tube. And then there was the whole, if anyone can relate to the whole feeding, they must eat a certain amount of ounces before they're allowed to leave the hospital in Canada. So it's a funny joke we make where we would literally be like, just 1 more ounce, and it's just a little bit of milk that they have to drink to order to leave. But she was on a feeding tube for a long time, so they don't tend to send kids home immediately on feeding tubes. So we really just wanted her to drink like 10 ounces of milk. But anyways, was getting fitted for the G-tube surgery because she wasn't drinking enough. Then they were gonna send her home on an IV. So we had to go get she had to get minor surgery to get a permanent IV inserted so she could go home on an IV. And then they transferred her to another hospital where maybe the communication was off or whatnot, but they were still pumping drugs through her belly button, which apparently now knowing that that's not how you're supposed to be doing it after a week or so. So she got an infection in her liver, which caused permanent liver. One of her livers is completely damaged because of that. So they sent her back to Sick Kids NICU, where she stayed for a month, and she had to recover from liver damage, which was nothing to do with HIE and all to do with that. So it was quite a whirlwind of like NICU, good and bad. But like anyone else that was in the NICU, definitely experienced the highs and the lows of getting the MRI, and of course the whole story of being told, all the things they won't do. And not really like researching and finding hope for HIE, honestly, while I was sitting in the NICU looking for some type of hope of like, what are we gonna really understand for HIE? Didn't know anyone else with HIE. So that's how I found this group of just like sitting in the NICU wondering what is HIE and what are the stories from that. So yeah, we were there for 31 days. And my daughter was on an IV at home until she was 6 months, and didn't experience any issues. There still does follow up with the NICU up until now, and she's 7, because of mostly probably because there was a little bit of like an at fault thing going on there, so they're probably protecting themselves a little, but also because she's diagnosed with cerebral palsy, so they tend to follow up with children that have diagnosis longer. But yeah, that's our NICU story.
Thank you all for sharing. I know this is really helpful. The next thing we're going to talk about briefly is just that process of returning home from the NICU and then dealing with kind of those feelings, kind of comments maybe from family and friends. A lot of families talk about if you come home and your child may not have a feeding tube or, anything that people in your life may kind of automatically assume they're having a diagnosis and something. Just kind of what that's like when maybe family and friends may say, well, everything's fine now. What are you worried about? Your baby's home. Don't worry about anything. And just the beginning of navigating that wait and see journey. And then if any of you had any specialists that you want to briefly talk about, you can do that as well from the very beginning, maybe those first like 6 months or so.
Our first experience coming home was just brutal, for like so many reasons. I mean, the NICU experience was too. And then you think you're going to get your baby home and like at least they'll be home, but there's so much trauma that you're dealing with. I mean, I wasn't myself for the first year of her life. Just the PTSD was really heavy. My depression and also my hypervigilance just to obsessively try to care for my daughter was extreme. I don't say that in a way that I'm like boasting or like I'm proud of it. It was not healthy. I mean, Christmas Day, my kids are trying to celebrate and open presents, and I won't take a break from doing therapy or unless someone else is going to come relieve me, like a family member, and they can do therapy with my baby for us to open presents. It was a lot of the first 6 months was definitely that, as well as just exploring all types of treatment and just really succumbing to the obsession of HIE, and how to help my daughter. As far as friends and family, my daughter did come home on a feeding tube. She's still on a feeding tube, and especially that first year, she was on like close to continuous feeds, and we had a lot of other secondary issues like her GERD and vomiting and dealing with weight gain. So it was apparent to people that something was, you couldn't just be like, oh, everything's fine. But people are still, they don't mean to be insensitive. They just don't know. I mean, we'd had people like make a joke like, oh, I wish my child had a feeding tube. It just sounds so crazy to say. I think they were just trying to like break that tension of like, this is uncomfortable for me. I'll make a joke to make you think that it's not as painful for you as it is. Now her feeding tube really doesn't bother me at all. Like, I'm so thankful for it. And it's just such a regular part of our lives. But at the time, not being able to feed her or nurse her or comfort her or have her take a passy, even to soothe her, those things were just so painful, because it's just an experience that you don't expect to not have as a mother. I mean, I know a lot of mothers do go through the grieving process of not being able to breastfeed and nurse, and I know that that's significant, but you don't ever expect to not be able to feed your baby. And that was definitely the heaviest part for me. And when I was in the NICU, I said, I was like, God, if you give me nothing else, please let her be able to eat by mouth, which is like a weird thing, but it was just so important to me. I don't know why. And in hindsight, I'm so thankful for her feeding tube. I've healed a lot from that. And there was a lot of, it just more was an issue with me. People wanting to be positive, especially my family, especially with them knowing how obsessed I was with trying to make sense of what our lives were going to look like. People would be overly positive, and I don't know what they could have done or said. I really asked myself, like, well, is there something else that they could have that would have made it better? No. And it's just, you don't know what you don't know. I didn't find hope for HIE until she was quite a bit older. So it was a very isolating time. Definitely everyone that I knew who had experienced birth left the hospital with their healthy baby. I didn't have a community. I didn't have friends. I didn't have people that I could talk to about this. Even everybody in my family, my siblings, my parents, my husband, they were traumatized and grieving the process, but I don't think that any relationship was shifted as much as like the mother-baby relationship, and the fact that she was taken from me and taken to another hospital right after birth. And I was separated from her. And, during that NICU time, I was traveling every day, and not being able to, nurse or feed or provide and had those motherly experiences, especially with her being my last child, I grieved that a lot. I can't say I regret those first 6 months. I can say they were hell. And I don't regret it because what else was I supposed to do? It was such a hard time. It just was what it was. I wish it could have been better. She was my last baby. I wish we could have had all the special moments and just, soaked it all in and loved all their little chubby little roles and watched them do their milestones and just, celebrated every little thing. But that's just not where we were at. It was impossible to, celebrate. It was just a lot of mental turmoil in my own mind from the events that we had experienced. I guess that's most of what I have to share about my first 6 months. I never know if I'm oversharing or undersharing with these things,
Great.
but
You're doing great.
I'll go next. So like I said, my son was only in the NICU for 8 days. So that gave a lot of people see, he's fine. He's fine. You're worrying about nothing. He's fine. And it was a constant stream of hearing from family and friends, but he looks fine. Look, he's doing this thing my kid did at 8 days old. And I'm like, I have other kids. I know what they're supposed to do, but it didn't matter to me because in my mind, everything was not fine because I experienced that trauma along with my baby. Like we were both traumatized. I struggled with letting other people hold him. If they held him, I was like, okay, that's good. And I would take him right back. Or if he even made a whimper, I'd be like, oh, he's mine. Give him back to me. And I kept hearing, you're going to spoil him. He's never going to, learn to be put down. He's fine. You need to stop thinking about it. That's in the past. The past being a month
Mhm.
was not the past in my mind. Um, and it was hard. When we came home from the NICU, we were given a referral for birth to three to come, which is great, except that the communication between two states, because our son was transferred across state lines, was a little bit blurry. And everybody came and they showed up and they're like, what's your diagnosis? Well, I only had known the term HIE and the name for it because I found Hope for HIE while in the NICU. And I happened to find it because I Googled newborn brain cooling. And I posted in a group, and somebody's like, oh, here's where you belong.
Mhm.
And that became my support. And that was like day 2 of his life, where I was like, okay, somebody's calling it something. Somebody has what this is. I knew it was shoulder dystocia, but other than that, everything you read about shoulder dystocia, it's either perfectly fine or totally terrible. There's no middle ground where I was. So birth to three shows up, they come, they see him, they're like, well, we're only really seeing him because he had seizures. And I was like, but that's like the least of the things that happened in his delivery and things. They showed up for a couple of times in the first 3 months and were like, yeah, we're gonna just discharge out because he's meeting all his milestones. And I'm like, he is 3 months old. How can you declare that it is fine that you're going to walk away? So we really struggled with that, with understanding like why everybody's just kind of like, okay, you're good. Nope, you're fine. And then to have professionals tell me that he was fine, and then tell my husband, he's looking really good, he's doing really fine. And then my husband grasped onto, he's fine. And I was like, we have to be ready. We don't know. He's 3 months old or he's 5 months old. And he was very big. He was a over 10-pound newborn. So by the time he was almost 6 months old, he's over 20 pounds. He can sit, but definitely can't get himself there. He can't push himself up on his arms. I'm like, he's heavy. Is this from his injury? Is this because he's just a chunky baby? I don't even know. And I was definitely in a really raw, scary place. Um, I don't know either that there was anything anyone could have said to me that would have made me feel better. But I definitely, in hindsight, have learned that I scared a lot of people off with my don't touch my baby, don't look at my baby, don't talk about my baby behavior. And I often will reply back to people, I wish you would have asked me how I was.
Mhm.
or worried about me because nobody was. I was fired as a patient from my midwife team at 6 weeks postpartum, and they're like, go, yeah, go find somebody else. And I was in no state of mind to try to find another doctor or therapist and anything. So those first 6 months were rough. And the specialists involved were also very like, it's fine. We'll check in. We'll check in again later.
I'm sorry you both had such bad first 6 months. I think for me, I tried to be, I think the first, like the NICU experience was rough. And then as soon as I went home, I'm actually just like, I guess you have to talk about like personality. My personality is actually a very positive personality. So I'm definitely that type of person just for me that can bounce pretty quickly, like even with past traumas. So I tend to just try to stay positive within myself. So after I leave the NICU, I am a pretty positive person, and I have a lot of friends and family. I'm lucky to have that, to keep positive, and so I'm very much a believer of like a positive mindset, and then that transforms to others. I do agree for sure, there's that whole they're fine thing that's very, very frustrating. I actually am more of a believer that's like, we're not, and it's okay. And so one of the things that I always tell my mentees too is like, the best advice, the only good advice, because I think everyone said there was no good advice. The only one good advice was, a friend of mine was like, listen, Megan, your child could have had a disability and you didn't know. You didn't actually sit in a NICU. They didn't experience HIE. Many children have different diagnoses and they don't have a story of HIE. So now you know your child most likely will get a diagnosis and you get time to prepare. You get time to research. You get to sit down and look at it and figure it out and have time to find help. And many others don't have that. It's just, here's a diagnosis, right? And so I don't know why that advice just really hit home for me to say, you know what, it's true. Um, I know my daughter probably, I knew from when she was in the NICU, she probably would have cerebral palsy just by her movements. And so now I get time. She's only 1 month old, 2 months old. I get to sit down, I get to find therapists, I get to find research, I get to look into it. And I'm not surprised later when they're older, right? So I try to take solace in that. I don't know why for me that just hit home, but that did give me some breath of like, okay, you're right. I need to just figure how I'm going to live. I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I need to move. I need to find a house that she can not have stairs. I need to put in a ramp and all of these things start spinning, right? Of okay, if we are gonna have this diagnosis, what are we gonna do, right? But I think for me, like my child coming home on an IV, it was very apparent that something was, she's not fine, right? So I think that's where I would have a different experience than some other people, is that you can look at my daughter and there's literally an IV hooked into her arm. And so no one can come up to me like, she's fine. Like obviously she's not, right? So there was a very much like of experience of like I'm going to set intentional motions to make sure she has the life of friends that also have babies. So many of my friends had babies at the same age, so we're going to go to those play groups even if she had an IV attached to her arm, and we're going to do all the things so that we're always feeling included. I ended up writing a children's book that was about feeling included as a Black child with cerebral palsy. So I wanted to add that in a perspective as well, is not only is my child going to have a disability, she also has to deal with equity and diversities and racism. So there's two things there, right? And so I was very much a push forward of we're going to be included and we're going to make sure you feel included into all things. And I'm going to change my mindset to be like, we're just going to do the things that we can do to keep you in that first 6 months. I know it sounds weird, but in the first 6 months, I was like, we're going to the play groups. We're going to go sing the songs. And I didn't even know at that time how, what her diagnosis would be to the extent of how, where it was going to be. But now she's a 7-year-old, and maybe you're gonna ask this later, but she's
Right.
7 years old, and she my child has a level 1 cerebral palsy, so she is a different experience of that, right? She can walk, so there's the whole, well, I don't know, like, does she have cerebral palsy, right? So now there's that back and forth of that, but she knows who she is, and I hope she stays positive. She definitely deals with bullying now at like being in grade 2, right? And so she needs to be as strong as possible, right? So me staying positive and keeping that, like, we are going to be included. She goes rock climbing. We're going to go to dance classes, just like we did it. I had to say that because it's the same thing I did when she was 6 months old. She's going to do when she's 7. And we're going to make sure that she's included just and felt treated just the same as all children, no matter if she has an IV in her arm, a feeding tube, whatever, so that she knows that she can do those things as well. So that was my mindset. But I think that that's definitely hard. I definitely want, like, in the other side is for me, I was very afraid to have any other children. So definitely that fear of, like, was it something I did? Is this because there was no, like, why did this happen? There's no known reason. Um, I was very afraid to have any other children. And I definitely, like, grieved that not having the birth experience of others. And it wasn't until my best friend had a baby and I got to, like, experience, oh, you can have this perfect birth experience, that it kind of, like, that grieving process kind of moved forward for me. But there's definitely a grief of that, of, like, this is not how a birthing experience is on TV or in other places and spaces that I had to, like, mentally uh go through. And I think that took some time for sure. And I also just want to reflect on some things the other panelists said, is the feeding part was a big struggle. My daughter was always underweight. We had to go multiple times for her weight. She almost got readmitted because of her weight. And so definitely can feel the same as that with weight issues, and having to wake her up every 2 hours while everyone else gets to let their baby sleep. I had to wake her up every 2 hours to feed her so that her weight would just maintain. And I definitely also, Jamie, agree with the breastfeeding. And I was very sad to not be able to breastfeed, but I did pump for a whole year, and woke up every 2 hours to pump. And I don't recommend doing that. It was wild, but but I did do it, and I felt, and I tell you, I think it's because I was like, this is what I have control of, right? When we talk about, like, what do we have control? I have control that I can pump. I can't control anything else that's happening, but I can control this. So I think that helped as well. Thanks.
Thank you guys for sharing. I know this information, is really helpful to families in our community, and I know that there are tons of families that are watching this now and that will watch this once it's published on our YouTube channel that can relate. So I really appreciate your vulnerability. Now we're kind of going to go into kind of the next phase of just sharing about those coming years after that, and sort of kind of what specialists, I know you've all kind of talked a little bit about it, but that early intervention, birth to 3 process, and then kind of any feelings on if you started with a provider and then your child graduated, because you build these relationships, or you get these diagnoses, or like if you have a feeding tube or something that maybe your child only needs temporarily, and just kind of those feelings of, okay, I thought it might look like this and it ended up looking like this. So if you could just share about that, and just sort of that process in general, that'd be great.
I could go first if you want. So I think for us, we started off, like I said, where we almost went on a feeding tube a few times, and then very underweight. And funny enough, like, to go straight to the end, my daughter is, like, overweight. I'm joking, but she's very thick. And so it's interesting of, like, struggling with weight for so many years, and now good to go, for sure. So I definitely see that as kind of what you're asking, of where we went and where we go. But also, like, eventually after 6 months, the IV came out. So that was a big, like, yay, no more. We actually went on a little trip to Niagara Falls, like, no more IV. I called it the no more IV trip. And I have pictures. It was so funny. It's so silly. Like, these are the things that we're celebrating. right? As I'm sure people can relate. Oh, you opened your eyes. Let's celebrate. Anyways, so these I think Hope for HIE calls them mini milestones, and I love that. We definitely celebrate those. Um, my daughter started with two AFOs on her legs and almost in between a level 2 and 3 of cerebral palsy, and did multiple therapies. We did therapies from the US. And in Canada we don't have as many different therapies for that. Research stuff in the US, research stuff outside, and we found this one therapy where it's movement therapy. It's mainly based in the US, where you just do the same movement over and over and over again for like weeks and weeks and weeks. So like she would just do a movement to like move her leg, and it just over and over. It's very interesting if you ever want to look it up. But we did that for a couple years, and she learned. Not, I'm not saying because of that, but she did just learn while we were doing that therapy to walk and stuff. So we ended up stop doing that therapy or graduating from that there. It's very expensive. But yeah, I think some of those therapies like physiotherapy, chiropractic, my husband is a massage therapist, so daily massages were happening. Like all of those types of things definitely I could say put together probably help. And then just this year she got moved up to level 1 cerebral palsy, because there's different criterias of how you meet in cerebral palsy. So she can now go upstairs, and so that moved her up in the level of cerebral palsy. So yeah, I think in that sense of thinking like, we're sitting in the NICU wondering, is our child going to walk or talk or speak or any of those things, and being told maybe not, and to where we are, we give thanks to the hope for HIE. To be, I know I keep saying, but I really do, like keeping hope, and also like not looking to, okay, that child did it, mine will, but more thinking about that my child is going to do the best she can with what she's got and the skill set she's got, and then accepting that whatever my child is going to do, that I'm going to be okay with that, right? Because we're the ones that are grieving what they can't do. They don't know what they can't do, right? We're the ones that know. And so accepting that, okay, my child is happy, content with what she's doing, and I need to be okay with that, right? So that was a big thing for us.
We didn't really see any specialists. Nobody really came around. They all kind of said, okay, bye. Uh, we did NICU follow-up every single year. Um, and that was once a year. And they're always like, okay, well, like here's where you want them, here's the range. And we use it on the very edge of the range, but you're meeting expectations. So he's there. He's fine. It's gonna be fine. His speech was the only thing that anybody ever had concerns with. Weirdly enough, it may sound like the speech thing was due to something else that he had, not necessarily just his HIE. Um, but for the first couple of years, we didn't really see anybody other than NICU follow up and our regular pediatrician, because birth to 3 would come back and they'd be like, we don't see anything we can do to help you. So we graduated out in birth to 3, um, multiple times actually. And then they came back at 2.5 and finally were like, oh, okay, well, we can do a little bit with him for a short period of time, because I had just given birth to my 4th child. And they saw him for a few months, kind of threw some names around about what could be going on with him, and then felt he was meeting the expectations that they wanted him to meet. And so they graduated him out permanently about 2 months before he turned 3 years old. And that was kind of it for us. He didn't actually get into speech and OT until he was closer to 5. After a lot of begging and pleading and stating my case to anybody who would hear me out, that I knew he needed help, but it wasn't the help I could give him because I didn't know what I was trying to help. I just knew there was something going on. So for us, we've graduated and gone back to therapy so many times. We just kind of keep making the rounds. He doesn't, like you said, he doesn't know he can't do things that other kids can do. I mean, he's just now starting to figure that out at 9. So it was definitely a grieving process for me to be like, see, I was right. I was right. So, and now we are in speech and OT again, and we're just working through it. So,
For us leaving the NICU, I remember just that last week because we knew when we would be discharged to the date because we had to wait for her G-tube surgery. So as soon as we scheduled her G-tube surgery, they said that's the final thing. You have 1 week. And that week, my phone just rang off the hook because we had to get everything set up. Our NICU wouldn't discharge until you had all proof of all of her appointments that they required. And medical supply people were calling me constantly, setting up training for us to figure out how to do the feeding tube and where are her supplies going to go and come from and what all does she need, get it with the dietitian. When she was discharged, and the therapy side of it, she was discharged with PT, OT, and feeding therapy, and she stayed in all of those the first year. She was discharged from PT at 1 year, and she's never required PT since then. Her gross motor is at peer level. She has graduated and gone on and off with OT because she does have some like visual motor delays. She does wear glasses, and it's likely related to her brain injury. At first, at birth, they told me that she was presenting with CVI potentially, but it's all kind of gotten much better. But I do wonder sometimes just how her vision and motor works. So she's currently still in OT, and that's just kind of been on and off throughout the years, more on than off. Just maybe like a 6-month break is all we had. And then feeding, she's been in her whole life with various degrees of how it's worked and how it's helped. All of those therapies we also did twice a week. So since she had 3 therapies and they were 2 visits each, there were 6 standing appointments every week. So that was just like set. And that's not like doctors or specialists or anything. When we were discharged, we were followed up by neurology, ophthalmology, cardiology, developmental specialists, GI. I feel like, and then we did see some providers on and off, like ENT. So there definitely for the first several months, there wasn't a day without, I remember saying like 3 is too many, like 3 appointments in a day is too much for me. Because it was every day she had appointments. And even when I came back to work, which I do still work, but I really had to manage my schedule, and thankfully they were able to work with me. And I have my sister who I'm really close with all of my siblings. They've all been super helpful, but one who's a nurse, and she came down and lived with us for 2 months to help us because it was like I was drowning. I could not keep my head above water. And then my mom helped still quite a bit. So saw a lot of doctors, so still in OT, still in feeding. We were discharged from neurology. At 1 year, we were told if you want to follow up in a year, you can. And then at 2, I did want to follow up, and he pretty much said like, no, we don't really need to see her. She doesn't have seizures. She's not presenting with anything, but my door's always open. If something comes available, give me a call. We saw him a lot the first year for sure. We had some potential scares with infantile spasms. We never had it, thank God, but she had all of the symptoms and did have some form of benign spasm activity. So that was a very stressful time. But going to neurology that first year, I don't know if any other parents have this with mild outcomes, but severe prognosis, it was like addicting because he was the one who told me my daughter would never walk. He was the one who told me that we would be lucky to interact with her. And he just was so heavy with his prognosis. And I don't know how you tell a parent something that's difficult. So it's not like I blame him. But as she definitely not like, the first 6 months, he was pretty much like, this is what it is. She was, the sickest baby I've ever seen, and he didn't have optimistic things to say about being on the more mild end until she continued to develop and meet more and more milestones. And when she did, he was just in shocked and surprised and remorseful. And I always imagined what that would be like. And then I got the satisfaction of seeing it. And I just am like, if I had an issue, I did not hesitate to call because it was like therapy for me to see him like eating his words. I'm not saying that's healthy. It's not. That was just, one of our experiences with our doctors. He's definitely who I have the most history with, right? Like that whole experience with this neurology, but we still follow developmental specialty. We did an intensive outpatient feeding program this summer that was 5 weeks every day, for several hours each day. And she, since then, is eating 70% by mouth. So she's really close to getting off of the G tube. As far as like her other things, her other skills, she's really close to peer level, for pretty much everything else. She goes to pre-K. She does things like the other children would. It's mostly the eating that we still have various challenges with, and a little bit of fine motor, which is so mild. But because we live in the Metroplex, we live in an area where there's like so many resources to us. I've always taken advantage of them. We also chose to do a whole host of alternative treatments. That was just a choice of myself. I'm not like advocating one way or the other. I will say for me, that was like another form of therapy. I'm the type of person that has to do something. I'm not the type to like combat my own grief and trauma. It was definitely a PTSD response, but I don't regret doing them because, who knows? But yeah, we did countless therapies. So it was just every day that first year, something, either an appointment or a therapy or alternative treatment. And then, to now, it's coping with a lot of, I don't understand it. I don't understand how we're here. I don't understand how our prognosis was what it was. And now, and I don't like to like put so much emphasis on her abilities or like seem like I don't have acceptance of children who don't have the abilities that I wanted for my child, which she now has, which I also feel like undeserving of this outcome sometimes. So I don't know. I know that I've heard that a lot of other parents with mild outcomes have that kind of survivor's guilt. That's something that I've battled with a lot because it doesn't make any sense to me how we are where we are. But she's in gymnastics, she does somersaults, she runs, she plays, she skips, she jumps, she goes to the playground, she's got friends, she tells jokes and laughs and is like the chattiest kid you've ever seen. And she still has her challenges, but at this point, there's really, the grieving stages is over because I'm just I love where we are. And, despite the feeding tube or the few challenges that we have, I'm really happy to be here. I know it takes a long time for everyone to get to that journey. And I think that's another reason why I feel guilty, because the outcome that I have is what I hoped for when I was going through that hard time. And now I have it. And I, wonder, what I did to get it. And I didn't do anything. This is how the world works. And sometimes things happen and this is what I have. And I just trying to be grateful for it because it's her story. And, there's never been a doubt in my mind that she is living the life that she's supposed to and that she's a gift. And no matter what she does, we're just so thankful that she's in our family and that she survived and she's with us. We just love her to pieces every day. So I think I've covered it mostly, but it was a lot. It's a lot less than it used to be.
No, that was great. And you kind of covered everything. The last thing I want to touch on, because I know we're running short on time, is I just wanted to share, since all of you do have children that are at that preschool school age, if you could just share a little bit about the support you receive, what you find is helpful, and any kind of like helpful tips or information that you would have hoped someone could have shared with you. Because I know some of our younger families, that's a really big transition, is when your child starts to navigate, whether it's preschool, the elementary school system, or what have you. So if y'all don't mind briefly sharing about that as we finish up for today.
I can share because I'll be short this time because my daughter's just in pre-K, so she hasn't started public education. She doesn't go to like the public pre-K, she just goes to a private school through a church. And so she's treated very equally as the other children. They don't do like intervention at that age, aside from the intervention that we get separately through private therapy. The only thing that's been so wonderful is that I went from preschool to preschool talking about her feeding tube and how she would need to have feeds during the day. I couldn't have asked that years ago when she was puking constantly, but we've really managed it. And she needs additional feed during the day. She needs it. It's super easy. I can show you how to do it. And even when we were going places and I was like, maybe she can just be here for 3 hours and I'm not even going to ask you guys to do it. Like, people looked at me like, this lady's crazy. She's not thinking that I'm going to give her child something through a medical device during the school day. But we found a preschool that is just amazing and accepting. And they were like, whatever we need to do, if we can do it, we will. If it's not something that we can do, then that's all, then we can't. But let's see. And I showed it to the directors there and the assistant director. And just from the beginning, it's been, what can we do? Yeah, so it is easy and it's not scary. And for people to see that was the biggest barrier. If someone would just give you a second to listen to you, and sometimes it's more complicated than what our feeding tube situation is now, but it's like, it's not scary, you can do it. And we'll see what comes, we'll start public school in a year or two. And then I'm sure, I know there's 504s and IEPs and all of that whole world, whatever we need to do, but ours is just here, we're early in that stage.
My son is 9, so he's been in school for a while, and he was actually in a 4-year-old preschool program, which our state offers, when the pandemic hit. And from that point, we had other children in school. And so, long story short, I talked with the special education people that I was very close to because of one of my other children. And I said, what does the hypothetical situation look like for him? We were talking about pullouts and therapies and this and that. And I said, when is he actually with peers his own age, like his own class that he can bond with? And the time of that was like lunch, recess, and a little bit of class time. Uh, Upon getting that information, we decided that we would attempt to homeschool him and followed up on our local homeschool laws and made sure we knew what was going on. We are on year 5 of homeschooling now. He meets or exceeds expectations for our state. He would not probably be doing as well in the public school system. He was diagnosed with developmental coordination disorder, otherwise known as dyspraxia. So he does require some therapies and some just little alterations to his day that would be very difficult and complex and have to be in writing and be all of this extra work for everyone. So one thing that I do wish people would have said to me was not, can't you wait to send him to school? You can get the school to do anything you want. You just need an IEP. I could probably get them to do what I wanted them to do, but was it worth the extra stress that I've already had for the last however many years? And then trying to navigate that system and hold people accountable and make sure people are doing things. And if somebody just would have also said, hey, did you know you can homeschool? You can do it. It's not as hard as it sounds. I probably would have said, well, 1, you're crazy, and 2, okay, well, what does it mean? So as a parent who homeschools their child, it is possible if you have the means and the ability to do it with jobs and things and make it work. It is possible. And school is great. It has lots of different other benefits. But in our family, we found that his socialization is more important. And he, as a homeschool kid, ironically has more social contacts than most adults I know. He knows everybody. He's kind of like the mayor when he walks into some places. They know who he is. They like to talk to him. Um, and for us, that's what mattered, is that he felt like he could be part of our community. Because at the end of the day, that's all we really want is somebody who can be part of society and share his journey. I will say we asked for supports from our school district. Our state doesn't require our school districts to offer supports to homeschooled students, so that's why we have a lot of private therapies. Um, but yeah, I will say, you know your child better than anybody else, and you know their needs better than anybody else. So follow your gut and really just believe in yourself too.
My daughter's in her 4th year of school in grade 2, and she's in the public school, and she's doing well. She definitely struggles with her reading, but which, back to our earlier, is like, is this because of HIE? Will always be a question, I think, until they're like in past finished university. But we have her in private tutoring because public school. But yeah, she's thriving, surviving, whatever the right word is, in public school, and has lots of friends, and definitely, like I think I reflected earlier, there is that age, or so I think someone said it too, is like there is that age now where they're wondering, why am I not as fast as the other friends and things like that. And I just quickly reflected that I did write a children's book for her class. so that she could understand that people with cerebral palsy, playing tag and things like that might not be as beneficial. So like learning different games that don't involve being the fastest person, and then building her confidence that there is things that she will not always be the best at, but there is things that will be really good at. And so when we find something that she's good at, like I know this sounds, people are probably like rock climbing, but she's really good at rock climbing. And so now we're like putting all our energy into like, okay, let's do rock climbing classes and just finding one thing that they're really good at. So the things that maybe they are behind in, they know that they have something that's for them. So that's kind of our focus. But just school, IEPs, I'm in that. I feel like I'm in the thick of that right now. Of like, does she need an IEP? I actually want her to have one. I'm like, can you give her one, please? They're kind of on the fence. Well, we don't know. We're gonna see. So I feel like I'm the opposite of like, no, please give her one, because I see the benefits of having diagnosis and how much help you can get once you have those papers and diagnoses. So yeah, I think we're right in the thick of that in this public school system. And we'll see. Maybe next year I'll have something different to say about that. But
Well, I just want to thank all of you for being here today. I know this information is going to be so invaluable for so many families.